Welcome to the Faith Pavilion. Thank you very much to the Faith Pavilion for hosting this session. The goal of this session is to make the link between the climate crisis and global governance, because fundamentally we don't have a climate crisis. That is a symptom of the underlying problem. The real challenge is that global governance is not fit for purpose. And if we can sort global governance, we can sort out the climate and much else besides. So the question then is, what do we do about that? It's kind of a big challenge, global governance. So that's what this session is about. The structure of the session is I will speak for a few moments. Then my colleague, the Reverend Fletcher Harper, will introduce himself and he will speak for a few moments. And then we'll have a Q&A. It's a fireside chat structure. We have half an hour. So that's the structure of the session. So, my name is John Vlasto. I work with an organization called the World Federalist Movement. We were founded in response to the Second World War and to the use of nuclear weapons. There was a widespread understanding after the Second World War that with nuclear weapons humanity could cause itself irreparable harm, and that because of that we need some form of global governance. Albert Einstein was one of the founders of the movement, pointing out that our current competitive system of national states was not a way to solve global challenges. Now, obviously, fixing global governance is a big challenge, and it takes a big catalyst to make it happen. There's a quote I use all the time from The Economist, Milton Friedman, who pointed out that it takes a crisis to catalyze deep reforms of this sort. What's done in those crises depends on the plans lying around at the time. And our job is to write those plans, to keep them alive in the minds of the decision makers until such time as the politically impossible becomes a politically inevitable. And we're in a crisis. I was having a discussion about this with colleagues recently about how bad does this crisis need to get. We are in a climate crisis, a biodiversity crisis, desertification, also pandemics, ongoing wars, and injustice and inequality around the world. So we are right now in a civilizational crisis. So what do we need to do with global governance to sort this out? Now, a colleague of mine, Maya Groff, she's an international treaty lawyer. A few years ago, she convened a Climate Governance Commission. It is co-chaired by Jörn Rockström of Planetary Boundaries, Mary Robinson, who is chair of the Elders, and Maria Fernanda Espinosa, ex-president of the General Assembly, maybe next Secretary General, who knows. They're working with the Club of Rome, and we'll come back to the Club of Rome in a moment. So this group, this Climate Governance Commission, produced a report ahead of COP last year. And it had a number of proposals for strengthening global governance. So it goes from short-term, low-hanging fruit, things that have traction already, from future generations. After the Summit of the Future, the Secretary General already said he is going to appoint a special envoy for future generations. So that's well in progress. The ICJ advisory opinion on climate, ecocide, these are all short-term processes that have existing campaigns are in process and happening. And then this report at COP last year of things we need to do to fix global governance extended out into the much more ambitious reforms, such as creating a fourth pillar of the United Nations, an Earth Systems Council to complement the existing three pillars, and to create a parliamentary assembly representing the people at the United Nations to complement the General Assembly, which represents the states. I'd argue that what we need to do to fix global governance is not really the difficult bit. It's easy to see how we could improve things from where they are. The difficult bit is how we go about it. How do we tackle such an enormous challenge? And to me, I hear all the time, I haven't been doing this work for decades. I'm fairly new to this, and I hear all the time from insiders that what I'm talking about is not politically realistic. Well, whilst we continue to pump carbon into the atmosphere and keep on heating up the planet, the consequences are going to become ever more severe. And the reality of physics trumps the reality of politics. The planet doesn't care if geopolitics is a little bit tricky. And it goes back to that Friedman quote, we need a catalyst. We have a catalyst. We are in a climate crisis. This crisis, our carbon emissions continue to rise. This crisis, I can guarantee, is going to continue to escalate. So we have a very big catalyst coming down the tracks. And research shows that historically, what has worked to impact global governance is when you get coalitions of civil society working with like-minded states and other actors working together. And a couple of examples cited in the research are the Mines Ban Treaty and the International Criminal Court. Now, the World Federalist movement that I work with, they took a leading role in the coalition for the International Criminal Court. So the World Federalist movement and the Climate Governance Commission have joined forces to create these coalitions around the proposals in the Climate Governance Commission report to implement them. So they've done this in a program we're calling MEGA, which officially stands for Mobilizing an Earth Governance Alliance. Unofficially, depending on where you're from and your sense of humor, it stands for Make Earth Great Again. And personally, I'm quite happy to take on the MAGA crowd because nationalism is going down the wrong path to solve these global challenges. Let us make Earth great again. So what MEGA's doing now, the first thing is it's doing what I'm doing here, making this case that really it's not a climate crisis. It's a wrong framing. That's a symptom. It's a global governance crisis, and that is the only level at which we can address it. The reason we have 29 years of COPs and rising emissions is the current approach to governing the planet doesn't work, and we need to strengthen it. In the short term, MEGA is working on a number of very specific proposals. So, for example, we're working with Maria Fernanda Espinosa on a proposal to declare a planetary emergency and the Secretary General's proposal to set up an emergency platform at the UN. We're working on integrated scientific advice. We heard in the keynote speech that the separate COPs don't make sense. It's one Earth system. That's absolutely right, and the scientists know it's right, and Johan Rockström knows it's right, and he is pushing for integrated scientific advice going into the UN. Some of you may know the Club of Rome recently sent a letter to the COP presidency with a number of recommendations to strengthen the COP process. So these are short-term, concrete things we're working on, and in parallel, Maya Groff, who convened this coalition, is based at an institution, it's called the New Institute in Hamburg, and she is engaged in researching and developing the longer-term, deeper proposals, such as creating this Earth System Council and creating a parliamentary body to represent the people. It staggers me. It staggers me, being new to this, that there is no body in the world, no institution, whose job it is to say what's best for humanity. The General Assembly of the UN is a bunch of ambassadors defending the national interest. That is what they're sent to do. No wonder the decisions that come out of that are lowest common denominator compromises, and they are not optimal for humanity. So, Maya Groff is working on these longer-term challenges. Now, what can you do? Well, that's why I'm here. That's what brings me to the Faith Pavilion. People are the key to unlocking this whole process. Politicians are licensed to act by public demand, and there is precious little public demand or perception that global governance is the challenge. I would love to see WWF, Greenpeace, and so forth saying we need to sort global governance. And I'd love to see people on the street demanding it. Now, I heard yesterday that 80% of the global public are of faith. The faith community are an enormous demographic, and they come together around values. And it's not only the faith community that come together around values. I would not say I am a faith, but I share these values, such as caring for each other and caring for the planet, recognizing that we are one human family on one small planet spinning through space. understanding that our collective future lies in our hands, and that if we're going to realize the incredible potential that we have, I mean, from Star Trek, Federation Earth, I mean, things could be so much better. But to realize that, we urgently need to create global governance that is effective, that is equitable, and that is accountable. So my call to action, please look up MEGA, Mobilizing an Earth Governance Alliance, has a website. Come and speak to me afterwards. See what we're doing, and then take it from there. Now, I can't think of a finer example of someone who is living the link between faith and climate action than our next speaker. So with that, I would like to hand over to Reverend Fletcher Harper.
Right. Thanks, John, and it's good to be here today. Everybody here okay? You can hear? I'd like to look at this question from a slightly different perspective. These sort of very high-level frameworks that are necessary that we're talking about don't have a prayer of becoming reality unless they're connected in very real ways with the struggles of local and grassroots people who are disproportionately impacted by the climate crisis unjustly and who often are persecuted for their efforts to do something about it. One of the major things that states, governments get to do is they get to decide about when it is appropriate or possible or accepted for them to use force and violence, including lethal force and violence, to enforce a status quo. And right now, governments around the world use that power to support the continued existence and expansion of the fossil fuel industry, to the end that the climate is destroyed and local communities are victimized, brutalized, and deprived of their rights. We see around the world in the work that GreenFaith does that whenever innocent local faith communities speak up to complain about the impacts that they're suffering from climate change or the impacts that they're suffering from the development of new fossil fuel projects within their communities, whenever they speak up and say, our crops are dying because of drought, our water is poisoned because the new oil or gas project has dumped its toxic contamination into our rivers and into our wells, and so forth. We're getting kicked off of our ancestral homelands because the government or this or that industry wants to build a new pipeline or a new fossil fuel project. That anytime these local people speak up and voice concerns about that and exercise their human right to free public association, they become very quickly subjects to threats of violence. This is true, and this is not news. This is hidden in plain sight, and frankly, it's not even hidden. Governments within a stone's throw of this pavilion are doing this. I'm from the United States. The United States government does this on a routine basis. We have staff who have experienced this kind of threat of violence in Indonesia, in Brazil, in different countries in East and West Africa, even in Western Europe, the so-called sort of haven of human rights. And so the reason that we are interested in this question about global governance is because the only way that the calculus gets shifted about where governments legitimately are able to use force and where they are no longer able to use force to establish a certain world order comes when there's massive public and social pressure to redraw the boundaries, to rewrite the social contract, and to make it that there are certain places that kind of violence is absolutely off limits. That needs to happen in relationship to protest and free assembly around the climate. That is the only way that we will be able to scale social movements to a point where governments will, acting in their own self-interest, shift the laws and regulations that govern the climate at the pace and scale necessary to make the changes that are needed. And in our perspective, that is the way that we get to the point where there is a governance system globally that more suitably reflects the needs of people and planet. Global governance will not come to happen through presentations at meetings such as this, though those are a useful piece of the picture. It will come into place if there's an increasingly large grassroots social movement in which people of faith play an important role around the world, calling for the end of new fossil fuel projects and related financing, a rapid and equitable phase out of existing production, an equitable scale up of renewable energy, and massive loss and damage payments from countries that are historic polluters to those who are suffering the worst impacts of climate change despite having done nothing to cause the problem in the first place. So I'm going to stop there with the suggestion that rather than focusing on the high-level negotiation points that might be necessary to establish the intellectual framework around this, that we focus a lot of our conversation instead on what it takes to support the courageous grassroots leaders on the front lines of challenging governments in the way that they create and implement policy, and challenging the violence that those governments frequently use to maintain the status quo. Thank you. I think now you all are supposed to ask questions or make comments. John's getting a headset.
Okay, I'm not quite sure how to juggle microphone and headphones, so I'll be working on that. But fireside chat. So what we'd like to do is get questions, comments, thoughts from people who are sitting here in the audience. So you're all sold that global governance is the way to go? Any challenges to the thinking? So either people agree with what we're saying here or they disagree. So, I mean, the lack of any response here, maybe everyone's asleep, maybe that's what it is. Does anyone want to express an opinion either agreeing with what they've heard or saying why it's not the case? Okay. I'm not a master of technology, so I hope this works.
Okay. Thank you. This is Pius Oko from GreenFaith. I live in Nigeria, but work within Africa. And so, with respect to the discussion for today in terms of earth governance, I just want to ask a question with maybe just a guide from the House with regards to situations where faith communities are being oppressed, just like Reverend Fletcher had said, and most of our campaigns are also working with local communities. So in the case of oppression relating to earth governance, how do faith communities need to respond appropriately? How do we respond to such oppression and maybe tie to sustainable future, kind of? So I just want to maybe get a little clarification on that, or maybe get a new idea to how we could work better with the governance system, especially like in Africa, where most of the system are kind of more, in quotes, autocratic, because most governance system doesn't allow for people's participation, or will I say faith participation. So just want to get maybe some quick nod on that, probably. Thank you.
So may I just check my understanding of the question you're asking? Oh, let you put your headphones on. Just to check my understanding of the question, you're asking how, if we had effective global governance in place, it would address the local issues that you're facing. Okay. Let me give an example. We currently emit too much carbon. I'm going to take my headphones off. We currently emit too much carbon, and we've done it for 30 years, knowingly. In fact, I read an article from 1912 that said when we burn coal, we release carbon dioxide, and that's going to warm up the planet, and in a few centuries that could cause us a problem. That was written in 1912. So it isn't exactly news that carbon dioxide can warm the planet. Economists have been saying forever that the way to deal with pollution such as carbon is to price the externality, is to put a price on carbon, is to have a global price on carbon, to have a carbon tax. Let us imagine we had global governance in place that was effective and equitable and accountable. Then we wouldn't have this trade fair of COP about various schemes to reduce carbon. We would simply centrally price it out of existence. You could put on your tax, and I'm not an economist, I don't know the numbers, but you put on a tax at $100 a tonne. You put it up by $10 a tonne every year forever. That incentivizes the market to work its magic and move away from carbon-producing production to non-carbon producing. At which point a huge amount of local activity goes away because you've dealt with the carbon problem centrally. That's what global governance is for. One of my colleagues working in this mega project, a guy called Alex Schmidt, he works for a corporate called Normative. They measure people's carbon emissions. In particular, they're looking to measure carbon emissions in the supply chain. This whole thing is a nonsense. It has to be done because we don't have global governance that works. We haven't got a global price on carbon. We have to use all these other mechanisms as best we can. But if we had governance, we'd tax it and the market would get rid of it. People complain that capitalism is based on greed and it doesn't work and it's broken. What I think is broken, again, it's governance, because capitalism is global and governance is national. And the corporate's management are responsible to the shareholders to maximize the profits. That's what corporate management is supposed to do for its owners on the whole. And where you have national governance and international corporates, they are incentivized to dance between all the different regulatory structures, which is a nonsense and a waste of time. And if you talk to corporates, it isn't really what they got into the business for. Corporates would like a level playing field. So let us have global governance, let us set regulation such as carbon price globally, and then corporates can be regulated to serve the people. That's what government does. But we don't have the governance at the global level, so we can't regulate global capitalism to serve humanity. Right, I better shut up and take some more questions. I see we have another hand. Did you want to say anything on that?
Hi, John. Thank you so much. I'd like to make you a question, because when you are talking about global governance, my question is always, what global governance should govern? Which is the object of global governance? You understand? You know that the states have a territory to govern. When we talk about global governance, from a legal point of view, what should be governing? What should be the object of governance, of global governance?
I don't think that is necessarily too hard to answer. So I am from the World Federalist movement. What federation means in the context of politics, well, depends which country you're in. If you're in the United States, federation and federalism means something completely different from the rest of the world, rather like liberal. But what federal means in the sort of dictionary definition is you simply have different levels of governance for different levels of challenge. So, for example, if I'm unhappy with the parking regulations in my local area, in my street, I don't go to central government in the UK to sort it out. I go and have a debate with local regional government, my area of London. And the United States is a federal system. Now, I'm not going to try and make the case that the United States system of government is the one we should all emulate. But it is federal, and there are many federations around the world, and most large, diverse countries are governed on a federal basis. And so this issue of what's governed at what level comes up all the time. And the principle is a religious principle, Catholic principle, of subsidiarity. So you do everything as close as you can to the people. So if it's parking, it's very local government. And if it's, I don't know, the train system, one can debate at what level that is best governed at. And the challenge comes when you don't have governance at the right level to tackle the issue. So with climate, it's global. Palo, who asked the question, is with Common Home for Humanity. They are arguing, and you can correct me afterwards if I get this a little bit wrong, but that the system of the atmosphere and the oceans should be classified as common heritage of humanity, to be managed for the common good of all. Oh, I'm running out of time. Subsidiarity is the answer. That's what should be managed at the global level. Global challenges, we like national governments. We want national governments to focus on national issues. We want to create global governments to deal with global challenges. There was a short fireside chat. Thank you very much for being here, and thank you very much to the organisers.